I think I first got interested in economics as a high school student. I used to like reading the newspapers, and there's a columnist by the name of Ross Gittins, who some people might be familiar with. He's quite opinionated, which I often really enjoyed. So I think that reading columns, articles about economics is what first piqued my interest. I studied economics in high school, but truly didn't think I was going to be an economist. It wasn't really a career path I had considered, to be honest, just something that I was interested in or enjoyed at the time.
And in terms of like sort of reading those columns or starting to think about those issues, I mean, some people kind of like read them and don't read a second one. What was it that kind of stuck out for you that you kept coming back and wanted to pursue it further?
I think that I could see how it was relevant to, actually not to my daily life, but to how big decisions got made. I was always quite interested in how big decisions got made. I was interested in making a social impact, leaving my mark, trying to leave the world a better place. And I was quite interested in reading these things to understand a little bit of the process behind how those decisions were being made, or how some of the people in power might think about those decisions. That was probably what was interesting, a bit of science with a social bent, I suppose.
Yeah, right. That's interesting. And that in sort of how you kind of pursued it and how you came about a sort of career in economics, that from that interest, how did things kind of progress there?
Very strangely, I did do economics in year 11 or 12, frankly, in year 11 and 12, frankly, because I was good at it. Also, I thought. I had a teacher for my HSE, Mr. Callum was his name. And wow, this is a very personal story, which I'm going to share. One time I wrote a trial essay for my HSE about, I think it was about trade in China. And I used a lot of superlatives in my essay because I was very tired. It was very late at night. And my teacher read my essay in front of the class and was kind of laughing at it. It was like, economists never use such ridiculous language, and this would never ever happen. I was very, very embarrassed and very ashamed. Went home, had a cry, and thought never ever going to be an economist in my life.
Right.
Then did first year uni. So at uni, I thought I was going to do a degree in accounting and finance on account of felt like I could probably get a job doing those things. It seemed like a reasonable thing to do. Did first year finance, the first course in first year finance, FINS 1613 it was at UNSW. They tried to teach short selling.
Oh, right.
Yeah. And I sat there and I was interested. I was listening. I was like, I said to the lecturer, wait, you're telling me you sell something that you don't own and everyone's just okay with this?
Yeah.
The lecturer's like, yeah, basically. And I was like, yeah, that's it. I can't do this. It doesn't work for me. So I stopped doing finance, and I'd done first year economics because that was part of my accounting major, and I quite liked it. I was quite good at it. So I just decided to do a little bit more economics. I like that. Just did a little bit more of it. And then, 4 years later, so I ended up doing a double degree in economics and commerce with 3 economics majors and an economics honours because I just couldn't shove enough economics into my degree.
Wow.
Atypical path, I suppose, but a good one. Happy ending.
I think that the short selling thing really rings true for me because whenever it comes up in the news, I have to go on that same deep dive I do every time to understand how it works so that I can then explain it when it would come up in the classroom, because it just like is conceptually something so bizarre, but something that has been so important for lots of reasons in recent times as well. Given your the extensive amount of economics that you did and studied, what were the kind of areas of economics that really connected for you in terms of your studies?
Micro
and
micro
right.
theory.
Yeah, right. Okay.
Yeah, the opposite of what most people said. I actually I did first year macro, and here's wow, I'm really spilling all of my secrets. Here's another secret for you, which is I didn't go past first year macro except in honors. So in honors, I had to do some higher level macro, but other than that, I literally never went through past first year macro, and that hasn't ever really gotten in my way as a professional economist. So that says something. But micro, I loved micro. I loved micro because I found macro interesting, but I found that the debate and discussion, particularly at an undergraduate level, was always very focused on one or two very particular measures. Like if you talk about macroeconomics, you're talking about GDP, you're talking about interest rates, talking about inflation and unemployment. There are some other things around that, but broadly, those are the things you're talking about. And macroeconomics as a discipline, and I'm way oversimplifying here, but
sure.
But macroeconomics as a discipline, professional macroeconomists spend most of their time on forecasting or trying to understand those four things in various guises. I couldn't see that I could contribute much to yet another different way of looking at the same thing. And I felt like economists have had 200 years and we still can't predict GDP. We're still pretty bad at it, to be honest, particularly in the long term. So found it interesting, but it didn't quite hit chords. Micro, I loved. And the reason I loved micro was because it was about individuals and how people make decisions on a day-to-day basis. And I could conceptualize that easier. I could get behind it easier. I could understand a little bit more of it. And I could see it in my day-to-day life all the time. So I loved micro. I loved game theory, theory of firms, organizational change, incentive design, base micro, supply and demand, market structures, you name it, I loved it. And I thought it was really interesting as a discipline because it was so continually evolving and there was so much extra that kept getting added to the discipline that it didn't feel like it was hashing over the same ground in the same way as I felt in first or second year that macro was. So that's my
Well, it's interesting because, and I think it's possibly a function of, the way some high school courses are set up, that micro is the very difficult topic that teachers dread coming to and that students are really annoyed about. And that I think what kind of can be focused on with micro is, large scale micro reforms, right? And the kind of those big picture things. But what maybe gets lost in curricula across the country is this kind of individual person firm level decisions and separating out macro from looking at things on aggregate, micro in really drilling down to what individuals and firms choose to do, why they choose to do it and the consequences of that. And I guess what I'm hearing from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that your life isn't dominated by quarterly or monthly data, that you're not waiting to see what unemployment's done or inflation's done, whether quarterly or monthly, that instead you're looking at maybe bigger picture behavioral and decision making questions. Is that sort of
that's a very accurate summary. I mean,
to
be clear, I absolutely look at the monthly and quarterly data.
Of course, sure.
Because I'm a nerd and I find it interesting more than anything else. I find it fascinating, and I look at economic data in the same way as one looks at the news because I'm genuinely interested in keeping informed, and because sometimes, because I'm an economist, people call on me to talk about it, and I can. But my day job, I do not spend my day job forecasting unemployment, GDP, inflation. In fact, I avoid doing so like the plague. Because I will almost certainly be wrong or say the same thing that everyone else is saying. So it's not my area of expertise nor my area of interest. I think that I don't know that I can add a great deal of value to the world, me personally, by saying, it's going to go up 1% or 2% or 0.5%.
Right.
It's all like order of magnitude sort of changes, and they're significant and important, but in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that someone will remember that number 5 years down the track.
And
so,
I think it's, oh, sorry.
No, you go.
I think it's interesting from a careers perspective as well, which is part of the purpose of these talks, is to help students see that, you know, that you can still be interested in growth, inflation, unemployment, overall kind of big picture things, trends. Look, you could still talk about the Nauru if you really wanted to, but that there are different ways to practice being an economist. And maybe this kind of segs neatly into this sense of like, what do you do in your day-to-day work as a kind of micro-focused economist?
So I'll start with a little bit of background just because it might help, which is that I didn't actually know what I wanted to do as an economist, and I didn't know whether there were jobs as an economist. And my parents encouraged me to keep, and I did graduate with an accounting major as well, just in case there was nothing there, because people don't really understand what economists do. In Australia, there's I'd say four main paths you can go into as an economist if you want to be working as a professional economist. So you can be in academia, you can do research on micro, macro theory, whatever you want to do. You can be in industry. So that means mostly in Australia, that's mostly working for the banks, the large banks, or sometimes industrial organizations. Economists working in industry, most of them will spend quite a lot of time on forecasting inflation, interest rates, so on and so forth. You can be in regulatory/government. You might split those into two if you liked, but basically that might be working on micro or macro for organizations like central banks, so the RBA or treasuries, or just line departments, or regulators, the ACCC, APRA, they all, Productivity Commission, they all hire economists. And there's a fourth category, which is where I sit, which is in consulting. I'll talk about that in a minute. I experimented with all four before I landed on one because I didn't actually know what I wanted to do. So I taught a little bit, I did a little bit of academia, light in honours. I worked at the ACCC for a little while. Actually, I never worked in industry, so I didn't do that, but I did try consulting. I ended up landing on consulting. So that's a good segue to what is it that I do on a day-to-day job. I've been doing it for 10 years and I still don't have a good description of what I do. But bear with me, but the short answer is I research and write reports on stuff relating to economics. That's very, very general because I get very general questions. So I'm approached by clients who may be in government, who may be in industry, and they ask a whole range of questions, some of which you'd never expect someone to ask an economist. Some of them you would expect someone to ask an economist. So one common thing that an economic consultant would do is, for example, write a cost-benefit analysis, which is basically you look at a government policy and you say, literally, what are the costs and what are the benefits? You use some economic reasoning and economic tools to get to an answer, and you can say, okay, this policy is better than this policy for reasons A, B, C. That's some more common things. Another thing you might do as a working economic consultant, which I did a bit more of, is what's the value of X? Often in GDP terms. So one project I worked on was the Sydney Opera House, and Sydney Opera House seeking funding. So when the government wants to fund the Opera House, or when the Opera House wants to receive funding, it goes to an economic consultant and says, what's the value that the Opera House brings to the economy in GDP terms and employment terms? And I can answer that question. It's hard, but I can spend 3-4 months of my life and come up with an answer to that question. But I also get to answer a whole bunch of really weird questions, like what's the best regulatory strategy for a payment system, or what's the future of work, or how can we price hospitals more efficiently, or what's competition like in the bitumen industry, which is seriously something that I spent 4 months of my life on. So really, like a really, really broad range of things. But basically the summary is, I get a big question like one of those, competition, value, whatever it is. I get a big question. I have a team. We spend anywhere from 6 weeks to 6 months. We do research. We do some number crunching sometimes. We write a report and we release it. That's basically what I do.
It's really interesting because, I mean, for some of the people who are watching this, just in case they need some clarification, consulting, you don't come in and you're kind of like, all right, so this is what we're going to do on a day-to-day basis. That you've got clients coming in saying, we've got a particular issue, a particular project, a particular policy, help us understand this, so that it's hard to, I guess, underestimate the variety of things that or overestimate, sorry, the variety of things that come your way, and that you kind of need to have principles to deal with. I guess what I'm saying is that there's no way you could necessarily prepare yourself to be like, all right, so every single question that I'm ever going to get, I'm going to have a background in it. You're going to have some bitumen experience for any particular economist that you recommend coming through. That instead, what I'm hearing for you is that you need to apply your economist toolkit, have your economist hat to things. And when you talk about this cost benefit analysis, while not all high school syllabi will deal with that, we'll definitely look at the fact that you have to make choices, right? Yep. You've got an economic problem. You can't do everything. So we have to make a choice.
Yep.
What do we give up in sense of opportunity cost?
Yep.
And then what's the benefit of pursuing this? So all of the principles that are being taught are things that are what, I guess, helps you approach whatever comes your way. Because if you've got a paying client coming to you, you can't say, no, we can't do that. Or I'm not able to do that.
Yeah. So I've definitely gotten some very hairy questions, and sometimes you can look at it and say, look, if I had 10 times the amount of time and 10 times the amount of budget, maybe I could give it a shot. But yeah, that's exactly right. So what we do is apply an economist's way of thinking to a whole really broad set of social and economic problems, whatever they may be.
Just for the people on the call, that if you have any questions, and Ray's just put this in the chat, please just add the questions to the chat. There'll be a time to ask questions if people would like to do it individually, but if anything comes up as we're talking, please just put that in the chat. You've talked about some of the most interesting projects that you've got to work on, the things you've been able to do. I think what would be interesting potentially for the audience is for people that are liking studying economics, thinking about taking this further, that, what would be some advice or some suggestions to kind of further their interest in economics, and then potentially, take a career or start a career in the field as well?
Advice or suggestions for a career in economics. What can you do to further your interest? I think read. It sounds a little bit lame, but economics is much broader than we can ever teach in a syllabus. I also used to teach. I really enjoy teaching, but there's so much more to economics than you're ever going to encounter. So read about stuff you're passionate about and interested in, and read about it from different disciplines and see if you can apply an economic lens. So just as an example, sustainability is probably the largest challenge of our time. It's really new in economics. We've dealt with it a little bit through externalities and thinking about the commons, and I can talk about that, but you probably have already encountered it at school. But that's just one example of, if you're interested in sustainability, read about sustainability, and then read about economics and sustainability, and see what comes up. Because that's not going to be taught in a university subject, at least not yet. It might be in time, but read about the stuff which interests you, and look about it, think about it. Career in economics depends on what kind of career you want to have in economics. If you want to be a professional economist, so if you want your title to say economist, I would suggest you do need to do an undergraduate degree which does major in economics. You do need to do some quant. You don't have to do all quant, and you don't have to do like you don't have to be a stats genius, but you do have to be a little bit comfortable with the maths. And a lot of employers will preference students who have an honours degree.
Okay.
That's a way down the track, but it's just something to keep in the back of your head, I suppose. It's not all employers and it's not a necessity, but it is a lot of them. So something to keep in your head if you want to work at, say, the RBA, that might be a requirement.
I think that that's a really interesting response, because I remember doing economics at uni, and we did a little bit on the economics of superstars, in the sense of looking at professional basketball salaries. And as someone who's obsessed with basketball, that this idea that you could like look at the economics of what people get paid, the economics of sports, that it's kind of, I think I like that idea of whatever you're interested in, read about that and then look at the links to economics. I think that that kind of stuff is really interesting. I think that the maths part as well is interesting. We spoke to Carme 2 weeks ago about this issue of maths as well, and I think that her thing was similar. You don't have to be an expert in it. You just kind of have to develop a level of comfort with looking at the numbers and being able to be involved in that process, but it doesn't have to be from day one.
I mean, like to be clear, I did econometrics. I like it. I actually quite enjoy it. The last time I ran I should say that I've also advanced a bit in my career, which means that I don't get to put my hands on the tools as often.
Yeah, sure.
But probably 7 projects out of 10 we would do without doing anything more complicated than Excel.
Right.
So you don't have to be a whiz.
Yeah.
By any stretch of the imagination. Some people will be, and that's fantastic. But you do need to be comfortable with a spreadsheet, I suppose, at the very least. Don't have to be a whiz, and don't get intimidated out of doing economics because you think it's super mathsy. Yeah. It can get super mathsy, but it's not that way for everyone all the time. Yeah.
And that, you know, that it's clear you're working as part of a team, and I'm sure everyone has their kind of skill set.
Exactly right.
You know, not everyone needs to have every ability on deck as well. Yeah. We've got an interesting question in the chat from our friend Justin. Justin, thank you for the question. His question there is, how would you advise a year 12 student who is deciding on uni pathways around economics versus business versus finance versus law? I think, you know, these are kind of the clusters that come up and that students are sort of looking at. I might throw commerce in there as well, in terms of being kind of business or economics orientated. You had a number of different pathways through a kind of similar cluster.
I did.
Yeah. Did you know, what would you sort
How
of...
would I advise?
Yeah. Some things to think about potentially for a student in that position.
The first, I don't think I would advise a particular way. I think that I would ask a person questions. So the questions that I would ask is, what matters to you? What's important to you? And I want to be really clear, because sometimes when I talk to my team, I talk to them about these things, and you should be really, really honest about what it is you want out of your career. By which I mean, sometimes you might say, I just want crap tons of cash. I want to shovel it in. I want to buy a house on a hill with a view of, So people are going to intimidate you and tell you not to say that, or that you shouldn't think that. If you feel or think that way, be honest with yourself about it. There is absolutely nothing wrong with it, but it should direct how you make your career choices.
Okay.
So I think the first thing I would say is just actually think about what is important to you individually from your career. Is it important that you have autonomy? Is it important that you have impact? Is it important that you have crap tons of cash? Is it important that you have really great career progression? Is it important that you have stability? What matters? That's going to define, I think, a lot of the choices that you should make. And then, yes, there is the question of what do you love? I think that most people have seen Ikigai. If you haven't seen Ikigai, I'd have a look at it. Ikigai is a Japanese concept about finding your sweet spot by saying, what do you love? What can you get paid for? What does the world need? And what are you good at? And that's a really good way, I think, of navigating some of these choices. Okay, that was backgrounding. I actually almost just finished drafting an article recently, so I will tell you some opinions on this, which is that law degrees, there are many people doing law degrees and they don't often get the outcomes that people think that they will. So you can actually, I will type in the chat because you're all a bunch of people who are interested in such things. Sorry, I'll be more specific. So there is a survey which is online. You can have a look at it. It's called QUILT, which is Quality Indicators in Learning and Teaching. They have a subsection called GOS, which is the Graduate Outcome Survey. You can have a look at it. It lists by degree field what job prospects are like. So how many people actually get a job when they graduate and what median starting salaries are. So if you care about job prospects and starting salaries, have a look at that, see if that informs your decision. In general, what do I think? Law degrees, do a law degree if you want to be a lawyer. If you don't want to be a lawyer, probably don't need to get a law degree. Business is the most, or commerce is the most general. It's often actually quite a good place to start. I started in a commerce degree. It will give you the opportunity to explore different majors and different pathways and find out what you like. Like me, I decided that I didn't like finance. That was easy because I could change across without losing anything. Yeah, economics is a very small pool. So there's about 4,000 practicing economists in the entire country. So you're going to work in very small. Yeah, it's small.
Yeah, you're right.
So you're going to be working in a small field. Many people who have economics degrees don't call themselves economists. They work in different parts. So, but I suppose that's another thing to consider, which is that you're selecting into a fairly small field, and do you want to do that? Those are some thought points. Probably if I wasn't sure, I would start with a general business or commerce degree rather than selecting myself too hard into one particular path, and then take a range of subjects in first year. Take a law subject, take a finance subject, take an economics subject, see what sticks, see what you like.
I think it's really good advice and things to think about. I think of my own perspective that I was so dead keen on doing an arts law degree after after high school, not because I wanted to be a lawyer, but because I thought that it would make me more employable across a bunch of fields and more interesting and more skilled. And the best thing that ever happened was I didn't get the mark I needed to get into law, right? So instead I did commerce arts rather than law arts. Through commerce, started doing economics because I liked it at high school, and I never changed, right? Yeah. And I just think that there's a kind of sort of a cachet around law that seems very desirable, but I also think that it's kind of like being a bit honest with yourself and thinking that, do I really want to practice law? Is there something that I would prefer to pursue? And I think that, doing first year commerce, where you have to do accounting, macro, micro, quant methods, that you get a really good introduction to stuff, even if you feel like you might have made a mistake when your first lecture in first year is quantitative methods A, which was my experience. So, but I think that that's really, really helpful. We've got a couple more questions in the chat. What are your thoughts and recommendations concerning the Bachelor of Advanced Finance and Economics? That might be a very specific degree, but there may be some sort of general ideas about sort of advanced finance and economics.
I don't know what an advanced finance degree is. So
that one's from University of Queensland.
Okay, there you go. Sorry, I'm a UNSW graduate, so I can talk to UNSW, but and also I'm older than I look. Just a little bit. So if my memes are real dated, you can all like jump on me later, that's fine. Advanced finance and economics, I don't know. I think that it sounds good, but it comes down to a question of what do you like, Ishan? Like what to paraphrase Marie Kondo, what's going to spark joy in you?
Spark joy, right?
Because that's the thing you should do. Finance, there are a lot of jobs in finance in Australia. It's a very, very large industry. Advanced finance and economics, my guess is that you're going to end up being very quanty. Whether or not you want to do that, up to you. Thanks, Justin. That is helpful.
Yeah,
look, double degrees are great. Double degrees give you lots of room to move. I like them, but you can choose whatever you want. I'd honestly just suggest being open to change. My main piece of advice for first year is doing exactly what Alex said and be open to change, because I also wasn't very open to change. I had a fairly strong degree that idea that I was going to do accounting and finance. I shouldn't have been doing accounting and finance, and that's okay. That was fine.
I think also with that, and this relates to Victor's questions a bit here as well, is that it's hard to know until you know.
Yeah.
And
so you never know. Also, like that's also a thing, and that's also completely okay.
But I think giving yourself the possibility to explore a few different things. So, Victor, if you're interested in history, law, economics, then I think that to choose a degree that allows you to pursue a number of those things in a way that you can sort of have some flexibility in terms of where you start and where you finish. Like I studied a comm arts degree and ended up starting out wanting to be a journalist and then finishing being a journalist. But because I'd done economics, I then became an economics teacher and am now in a position where I'm doing some work with the RBA's public education team, right? And so all of that is possible because of a pursuit of some of my interests. And I'm not saying there's a direct line between all these things, but I think that if you're able to choose a degree that gives you the flexibility to explore a few different things, then I think that would be useful. Let's deal with Leo's question before we end this part of the chat. It's been very good. Leo's question is really good. He says, do you think AI is going to realistically affect job security within the finance/economics industry?
It's a really excellent question. I'm gonna be such an economist and give a pop-out answer, which is it depends. You know, someone's an economist when they say it depends, they start everything with it depends. No, but I will give a less cop-out answer than that. I think that artificial intelligence is going to affect what we do and how we do it. I am very hesitant about claims that everyone is going to lose their jobs.
Right.
So that's the nutshell of my view. Why do I think that? Well, I think that Queen Elizabeth I, not the second, but the first, so like 1700s Queen Elizabeth, rejected a patent for a knitting machine. And she did so, and this is a direct quote, for fear that it would, I won't do a direct quote, I'll just say she rejected this patent because she was worried about the jobs of knitters. And that was in 1700.
Right.
So our fear of machines and robots stealing our jobs is very, 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 very old. And we do, in fact, have periods where robots do steal our jobs, like welcome to the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah.
It happens. There is mass unemployment and things go in waves. But inevitably, we all seem to manage to find ourselves back in jobs again. It's a bumpy ride. Will some people lose their jobs? Yes. But will there be no jobs? I doubt it, on account of like people like going to a personal trainer. And do you need to go to a personal trainer? No, I don't know, maybe. But people like doing it, so they do it. So they pay someone to do it. And it's a service that we like buying. And AI is remarkable. It is going to change the way we think. It is going to change the way we act. It is going to change our jobs. We're probably going to work alongside AI a little bit. That's my hypothesis. But is it going to completely replace work? I think that the answer to that is we wish.
Yeah,
like
right.
it would be really nice.
We could stop doing all the boring tasks and just outsource that to artificial intelligence.
Yeah.
I think that the personal trainer analogy is good, because you could use AI to say, develop a program for me to achieve these gains. But in terms of whether you would stick to it, that there's something that the trainer plays, or in terms of consulting, you could put at the moment a question into AI and get something broad, but in terms of industry specific, tailored, able to iterate. At the moment, that's not the capability. So there's some professional touch that is still important in terms of the way that it works at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, it's pretty good. And I'm sure that everyone here has experimented with it for an assignment or something, and it's only going to get better. I listened to a podcast with Ross Roberts, who's quite good. He runs Econ Talk. It's another thing you can look at or listen to if you'd like. But one of the gentlemen who was a guest on the podcast made a really interesting and valid point, I think, which was, he said, we should stop worrying about why robots have become so good at becoming human and start worrying about why humans have become so good at becoming robots.
Right.
Like, he's basically saying, like, a lot of the way we think and act, we're trying to imitate robots. We're writing formulaically, we're thinking formulaically. There's a right answer, there's a structure, we're looking for it, we're all seeking it. Why don't we just stuff things up and say stupid stuff every once in a while? What if we tried to be less like robots and tried to be more like humans? Maybe there's value in that. And I think that, like, for all of you incredibly bright, motivated, talented young people who've got your whole careers ahead of you, I think that that's what you should be thinking about. I think that you should think about what makes me different, unique, and special that a robot doesn't have. A robot will Google faster than you. So it's not about your Google capability. It's about what are the experiences and insights you can bring that are unique and special because they're about your lived life experience.